Welcome to this screencast on Ruby's self and how we can change the self while you're writing Ruby code. This is a very useful technique for writing your own DSL. So let's get started. And also I'll be using the instance eval, and if you don't know how it works, I have covered that in episode number 12. So watch that before you watch this thing. Otherwise you won't follow. Let's try. I'm going to write the invoice DSL. Invoice is my domain. Before that, let's see, query the self. Who am I? It says main. Okay, and the class is object. Okay, by default, everything that you write is going into the Ruby Supreme object. Now I want to write a DSL, like I want to say invoice, and I want to have some methods here. Before I do that, let's do this self and then end. Okay, so you start with something syntax that you want to represent the domain, something easy to read, so it looks very domain specific and it's very readable. If you execute this, undefined method invoice for object, because everything is shoved inside the supreme object, Ruby supreme object called object. Invoice is not defined there, so it's complaining. Let's define an invoice method. By default, any method can take blocks, and if you don't know about blocks, I have a screencast that covers block basics. So let's run this thing and see if it works. Okay, it's not printing anything yet, so let's see what's going on here. Okay, it's calling. Okay, so inside this invoice, I'm calling the invoice with a block, so I have to yield to the block in order to execute it, right? Okay, let's yield to it. And now the P self gets executed and it says it's main. As we saw, the outer scope was also main. And the class was object. Here, the case, it's the same case, okay? Now, let's say for that particular invoice I'm going to submit to a client, I want to have a method called period. I want to say May 1, 2008 to second parameter is 2, which is May 31st, 2008. And if I run this, obviously we don't have, it's looking for the period method in main object yet. Still it's looking for it by default in the Ruby's object, okay, supreme object. So now what I want to do is I want to define my own library class my cool DSL and define my method period here from 2. All it's going to do is just say invoice period is and 2. That's it. Now we have a period method. Can we call this period method? No, it's still looking for it in the object. So the question is, how do we change the self to the instant of this so the Ruby knows period is declared in a class called myCoolDSL. That's what I'm going to show you now. So let's do, I want to say myCoolDSL, I instantiate it. Okay, and then I do a instance eval, and then I pass in the block. Okay, basically I'm saying, hey, when somebody calls the invoice method, evaluate whatever is in within the concept of myCoolDSL. If I run this, course it fails, it says, and if it thinks a block is a variable, but it's a block, so you need to specify this is the block basics. You need to have this in order for this thing to work. So it says invoice period is May 1, 2008 to May 31st, 2008. Now Ruby was able to look up this period method without, here specifying mycooldsl.new and then saying would look more like a Java or some other language. You instantiate it here and then call a method dot and then accept period. You have a receiver and you send a message to it. So by default we change the self. So what is the self here? Self is now my cool DSL object, and if you print the class you can see now self has been changed to my cool DSL. So you don't need to provide the receiver. By default my cool DSL is the self, so you don't have to explicitly instantiate and use it as a receiver and then dot. So this is very readable, and this is how the DSLs are written. This is the very basics of DSLs. I'll be covering more concepts later on in following screencast. So if you enjoyed this screencast, please recommend me on Working with Rails. Thank you. God bless.